The year is 2654. The Terran-Kilrathi War had been going on for over 25 years at this point. Despite earlier setbacks for the Terran Confederation, such as the Battle for McAuliffe, the war between Confed and the Kilrathi Empire has settled into a bloody stalemate. Continually looking for a means to give humanity the edge in this long war, Confederation High Command orders the replacement of the aging Scimitar medium fighter with a new strike craft that would shift the paradigm of space combat in Confed's favor. Origin Aerospace, a well-known and respected Terran defense contractor, answered the call for a new fighter. Their engineers and designers quickly went to work on the first ship of what would become a long-lived family of spacecraft, the YF-44 Rapier. She weighed in at 13.5 tons and her length was measured at 24 meters, 1 meter more than the Scimitar. One of the most astonishing design breakthroughs of this craft was in its engines, rated for 450 kilometers per second and 1300 kps with the afterburner engaged. Its maximum yaw, pitch, and roll were equally groundbreaking, as they were rated at 10 degrees per second for all three. These numbers are particularly important when compared to the Hornet light fighter, as the Rapier could easily outpace and outmaneuver its lighter sister in arms despite being designed for the medium strike role. Now, typically such high speed and maneuverability would often come at the expense of offensive and/or defensive capability. Not so with the Rapier, which was able to come equipped with 2 Mark 25 laser cannons mounted on its wings, and dual neutron guns mounted near the front fuselage. Coming with a standard loadout of 2 Dart dumbfires, 2 Pilum friend or foes, and a single Spiculum image recognition missile. When her guns and missiles are taken as a whole, this meant the Rapier came surprisingly close to the offensive potential of the much heavier, and slower, Raptor heavy fighter. However, despite these revolutionary developments by Origin, a design sacrifice had to be made somewhere, and that somewhere was in the Rapier's hull. With 5 centimeters of armor plating at the front, 4 centimeters at the rear, and 3 centimeters on the sides. This meant that the Rapier's armor was greater than that of the Hornet, but lesser than that of the ship it was meant to replace, the Scimitar. Perhaps in an effort to compensate for this, Origin engineers equipped their baby with a shield generator capable of outputting 7 centimeters of armor equivalent strength on both fore and aft shields, which matched the strength of the bigger and heavier Raptor. The first noted engagement for the Rapier on the front lines was when it was still undergoing prototype testing. The legendary Tiger's Claw was chosen to host this new fighter, and none other than Christopher "Maverick" Blair was chosen to put her through her paces. This field test was nothing more than a standard 3-point patrol, but the Rapier at the hands of Blair tore through the Kilrathi like a cat through a can of Fancy Feast. They were caught completely unprepared to fight back against such an advanced fighter. Truly, the Rapier had not only lived up to its hype created by the Origin marketing department, but the expectations of Confed's finest as well. Soon after, full production of the fighter began, and the Tiger's Claw were among the first carriers to receive enough Rapiers to form a new squadron on board, the Black Lions. The timing was impeccable. For the first time in the war, Confederation forces had begun to get the upper hand in the contested Vega sector, and were now closing in on the Venice system, home to a starbase that acted as the main coordination point for the Kilrathi military command. If Confed could destroy this base, Kilrathi command and logistics would be severely disrupted, and the Terrans would finally be in a position to successfully press the offensive and liberate the Vega sector. The Tiger's Claw, tasked with this knockout punch, launched a small fleet of elite fighters with the Black Lion Rapiers at the forefront. It was believed that as the Kilrathi defenses were expecting a large-scale attack by Terran capital ships, a small strike force could punch a hole through to the starbase and annihilate it. Confed strategists had it right on the money this time. The fighters penetrated deep into the system and destroyed the base. While their pilots were arguably unmatched in skill, it can be said that the new Rapiers had a major part in this decisive victory. Afterwards, the pilots of the Claw would effectively use the Rapiers on 2 separate incidents, the first being the hunting of the Sivar dreadnought responsible for the destruction of the Goddard colony, and the second being the disruption of the Kilrathi invasion of the Fayarka system for their annual Sivar Ishrad ceremony. The Rapiers would also be used by Tiger's Claw pilots Ian Hunter St. John and James Paladin Taggart as part of a daring hostage rescue operation informally known as Freedom Flight. Roughly 10 years later, by 2665, The fortunes of war had brought both the Terran Confederation and the Kilrathi Empire back into a stalemate. This time, Confed was fighting to keep the Kilrathi from spreading into the Enigma sector, which contained several key jump points that led directly into the Terran homeworlds. By now, the Rapier had become a regular player in Confed strike fleets. The design was so beloved and effective that it received several upgrades and refits over the past 10 years. The fighter craft that served currently was far different than the one that saw combat in Venice, running under the designation of the F-44 G Rapier II. The design of the Rapier G would arguably be the most recognizable of the Rapier designs, with its distinctive wing shields on both the port and starboard sides, but the G model still managed to generally keep to the same design structure as their predecessor. The Rapier G's length was only 19 meters, compared to the original Rapier's 24. This model saw no change with its speed and maneuverability from its predecessor. Maximum velocity still topped out at 450 kilometers per second, and the afterburners retained their speed of 1300 kps. The same can be said for a maximum yaw, pitch, and roll, with the fighter rated again at 10 degrees per second for all three. While little had been improved with the Rapier's maneuverability, its gun loadout was significantly different. She still carried 2 laser cannons for long-range combat. However, they were moved up to the front fuselage underneath the cockpit area. Now, mounted on the wings were 2 particle cannons, which were more advanced versions of the old neutron guns allowing for more range. The Rapier G was also mounted with the latest in anti-missile countermeasure technology, chaff pods. Miniature electronic devices that, when deployed, were meant to misguide incoming missiles currently targeting the Rapier. The default missile loadout, on the other hand, saw little change in its ordnance. 2 dart dumbfires and 2 pilum friend or foes, but instead of a single spiculum image recognition missile, in its place were 2 javelin heat seekers. Her armor plating had received a significant boost since the first Rapier debuted, with the front and rear hull sporting 6.5 centimeters of armor plating, and 5 centimeters for the port and starboard sides. The shields would be bumped up by an extra centimeter of strength, bringing their rating to 8 centimeters armor equivalent. This new variant of the Rapier by this time period played an integral part in the wartime service of 2 historic carriers, the first being the TCS Concordia in her defense of Gora-Khar. The world of Gora-Khar, based on the system of the same name, was a rebel Kilrathi world that threw off the rule of the Empire somewhere on or after 2655, and joined the Terran Confederation. Now, over 10 years later, the Kilrathi had come back in force. Their primary target was Olympus Station, a militarized starbase built by the Confederation to defend the system. If the Kilrathi could overwhelm and obliterate this obstacle, then the road would be laid bare to the conquest of the Gora-Khar worlds. The Kilrathi were relentless and Olympus Station was soon to fall, but Confederation forces were able to reach the station in time and prevent such a disastrous outcome. 2 pilots were specifically singled out for their meritorious actions in defense of Gora-Khar, Christopher Maverick Blair and Rauga Hobbs Narhalis, both flying F-44G Rapiers. The second carrier to effectively use the Rapiers was none other than the legendary TCS Tarawa in her epic end run to Kilrah, where the Tarawa and her people were charged with a high-risk, near-suicidal attack on Kilrah itself, as part of a long-shot plan to decimate the Kilrathi fleet. The Tarawa succeeded, and much to the shock of Confed High Command, the Tarawa's crew and her pilots, the carrier and her fighters managed to return home to tell the tale of their heroic deeds. But for the Rapier, suicidal missions were just another Tuesday. However, the official description of events called it the F-44 C Rapier. It could possibly just be a simple typo, and the writer meant to describe the Rapier G. But by the time of the Tarawa's end run, the Confederation had suffered a recent series of losses in men and war material, so it's entirely possible that the Rapier Cs were pulled out of mothballs and rearguard positions to fill the Tarawa's complement. There's no definitive answer, but either explanation would be plausible in my opinion. The Rapier G would also see action in one of the darkest hours during the False Armistice incident, the Battle of Sirius. While Confed losses would be high, forcing their fleets to retreat, the Rapier pilots undoubtedly took out far more than their fair share of cats, which contributed to the simply horrendous number of losses inflicted upon the Hakaga fleet's fighter and bomber complement. By 2669, the Rapier Gs had begun to be phased out in favor of the new Hellcat 5 for the medium fighter role. which was possibly due to the recent advances in shipbuilding after the Battle of Earth, and the terrible losses to Confed's existing strike craft incurred during said battle. But the Rapiers would continue to see service in non-critical systems, and even be sold to the Free Republic of Landreich and the Union of Border Worlds for their navies. After the Terran-Kilrathi War, the most canonically noted role the Rapiers played was flying escort for an operation by the Free Republic of Landreich to salvage and refit an abandoned Kilrathi supercarrier, the KIS Karga. Jumping forward to the peak of the Nephilim War in the 2680s and 90s, 3 modernized variants of the Rapier, the Blade, the Vanguard, and the Cavalier, began appearing in the battles against the Nephilim. Information about this time period is virtually non-existent, but the Rapier Vanguard model was reported to have helped lead the first offensive charge into Nephilim territory through a space gate. After the war, these same Rapiers would find a new role in the independently held Antares quadrant of the Epsilon sector, where mercenaries and privateers alike would come to depend on the rugged versatility of their Rapiers to keep them alive. The Rapier series has perhaps outdone even the wildest dreams of its original design staff at Origin Aerospace. With close to 50 years of battle-worn reliability and counting, the sun may never set on this famed line of starfighters. I need to give a special shout out to Clavs81 for the 3D models he's publicly released to the Wing Commander community. This video either would not be possible or not look half as good without them. They also made learning how to do 3D work in Blender a lot more fun. I invite you to check out his site, Hangar B Productions, if you wish to see more of his 3D work.